y'all. This is Shane Sams. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast today. Super excited to be here by myself. I do not have a guest on this episode of the Shane Sams Show because, one, I'm celebrating the 100 episodes that we just launched. You know, last week I talked to Priscilla Shire on the podcast, and she was my very special guest for the 100th episode of the Shane Sams Show. And, you know, this podcast started out, it actually was a different name when it started out. It was called Membership Masters. And, you know, I really just needed an outlet to talk to other experts and authors and entrepreneurs. And at first, all we were talking about was memberships. But then my guests started getting bigger and bigger. And I said, man, I need to open this up where anybody can come because there's just a lot of information here. And I've, you know, built a lot of amazing people into my network. I've gained a lot of influence over the years, and I want to bring these people to my audience so my audience can learn how to get influence and earn income and make an impact out in the world. But this is not my only podcast. I've got another podcast called the Flipped Lifestyle Podcast. I think we're over 600, close to 600 episodes on that show right now. I've kind of lost count. And I've done dozens, maybe hundreds of other podcasts. I don't even know now about how many guest appearances I've made. Plus, when I started out, I had other podcasts. I had a podcast one time called The Bible Business Plan, where I was doing a daily Bible reading. I was doing a podcast with my wife a few years ago called the Q&A with S&J. And my very first business, my very first podcast was a football coaches podcast called The Coach XO Show. So needless to say, I have recorded a lot of podcasts. Podcasting has been at the center of everything I do for the last decade, and there's a good reason why. I believe podcasting is the most powerful medium on the planet today to build a relationship with your audience, build a relationship with your customer. And it is the ultimate springboard for anything you want to do in business or in ministry or in nonprofit world or in life. You know, just 10, 20 years ago, nobody could be heard. You had to turn on the news. You had to watch the big stations. You had to get on it, be an anchor up in the front desk of a news station to even let anybody listen to you. And now with the push of a few buttons and some minimal equipment, you can say anything you want out into the world. Podcasting lets you go into the most intimate places of people's lives with them. You know, we listen to podcasts on our commute to work. Heck, I listen to my podcast in the shower. I got a little shelf and I put it up in the top of the shelf and I listen to people's podcasts while I'm shaving and getting my hair ready. Podcast allows you to go on a walk with somebody. It allows you to go to the gym and work out with somebody. It lets individual people with a small team, people like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan was a comedian. He was the host of Fear Factor. And whether you love him or you hate him, you can't deny that he is the biggest podcaster on the planet Earth as of this recording. And he just started his podcast with him hanging out with his friends. He's got like one or two people working for him. And he's making tens of millions of dollars every single year as a podcaster. So on this 101st episode of the Shane Sams Show, I thought I would share with you all the wisdom I've picked up, everything I've learned about being a podcaster over the last 10 years, everything I've learned after recording and launching probably over 1,000 podcasts of my own, and give you the knowledge and information you need to become a podcaster too. I want to teach you how to start a podcast. You know, at the end of every Shane Sams show, I always say, pick your stone up, cast it out upon the waters, and cause many ripples. That comes from a famous quote from Mother Teresa that I absolutely love. A reporter was interviewing Mother Teresa, and he said to her, "Do you really think you can change the world alone?" And she laughed at him, and she said, "No, of course not. I don't think I can change the world all by myself, but I can pick my stone up, cast it out upon the waters, and cause many ripples." And that's what we do at podcasting. We pick up our stone, and we cast it out upon the waters, and we teach people things like how to make income, how to start a business, how to become an entrepreneur. We learn how to gain influence, how to build a network. So we pick up our stone, we cast it out upon the water, and we cause many ripples. I learned how to create an impact in the world with my voice. So every time I record a podcast, I pick up my stone, I cast it out upon the waters, and I impact somebody out there listening to me. But my job is not to just cast my stone, it's to let that ripple go out and hit you. And I think there's somebody out there listening to my voice that wants to be an entrepreneur, wants to be an expert, wants to be an author, wants to be a person who creates income on the internet, wants to be a person who creates influence around them and in their life. I think you want to impact the world. So I want to equip you to do that today by giving you my 5 best tips on how to be a podcaster. Now, this ain't your normal podcaster episode here, people. You're talking to a guy who literally looks in the mirror every morning and says, I'm a podcaster. I don't care what my job is, CEO of Sam's Digital, head coach over Flip Lifestyle, speaker on a stage with 10,000 people looking at him. When people shake my hand, I look at them in the eye and say, I'm Shane Sams, and I'm a podcaster. And I've got some different philosophies, y'all, about how to create a great podcast fast. You're going to hear a lot of gurus out there that are going to disagree with me, but that's okay. I bet I've got more downloads than they do. So this is going to be the everyman's guide to starting a podcast. It's not going to be the fancy click my $8,000 affiliate link so you can buy this microphone podcaster's class. No, you're going to hear how an old boy from Kentucky built a podcast empire, and you're going to learn how he did it imperfectly. You know what I say around here? It ain't got to be perfect. It's just got to get done. So let's see if we can get you a podcast, and let's see if we can get it done. All right, I got 5 easy steps to starting a podcast. 5 easy steps starting a great podcast that people actually download and people will listen to. Step number 1, don't worry about fancy equipment. Now, this gets people hung up immediately when they try to start a podcast. They're out there, and there's so many things out there that say, use this microphone, use this mixer, use this equipment. Well, here's the secret to that. Most of those people are just hawking equipment. They're recommending the equipment that gives them the best commission. That's why they're making you buy $1,000 microphones and $2,000 mixers. That's why they're making you download crazy expensive software that costs you a monthly fee. You don't need a ton of fancy equipment to start a podcast. You know, when I started my podcast, I had $200 Walmart computers. Now, a faster computer that's more expensive will help you go faster in the editing process, in the creation process. But you don't have to go out and have a MacBook Pro. And I use a MacBook Pro. Now that I can afford to buy one, back then I couldn't do it. And if I was just starting out, I would never tell anyone to go do that. You can go out and buy a reasonable computer and you can record yourself on your podcast. Listen, we use Zoom to record our podcast. I am recording right now on Zoom. I just started a meeting and I'm the only one in the meeting. And I buy the cloud storage on Zoom. So after I hit record here, it's going to go to the cloud and it's going to be there for my team to edit. And if I was on my own, I could edit it myself. There's even an option on Zoom where you can save it on your hard drive. And almost every software we see, like Google Meeting or anything that you can broadcast online, records you. Heck, you could probably stream straight to YouTube and just download the file and strip the audio off of it. Don't overcomplicate this stuff. All you need is a reasonable computer, something like Zoom or some way to record yourself speaking. And there's free programs out there like Audacity that will let you edit the podcast. Heck, last night I was recording a video on this software called Loom. It's a great software. It goes into your browser. You can click a button and you can record your screen. And I recorded a video that a buddy of mine needed, and I went in and edited it right there in Loom online. So there's tons of solutions out there to edit your podcast, and you really don't need a powerful computer to do it. If I lost my computer today, I could go to Walmart and buy a $200 to $500 computer, and I promise you there'd be a podcast next week. So don't let the gurus tell you got to have some fancy computer to do this right. You also don't need a fancy microphone. Y'all, listen, this microphone right here, I don't even know what it costs. Hold on, let me look it up here. I'm going to type it in. I'm literally, can you hear my keyboard? Amazon. I'm going to go to Amazon, and I'm going to type in this microphone that I'm using. And you're listening to me, so I must sound pretty good, right? All right, the microphone that I'm using right now is called the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X USB Cardioid Dynamic USB XLR microphone with foam windscreen as a bonus. You can get this microphone right now on Amazon.com, and it's only around $76 to $99. So less than $100 will get you the same microphone that I've used to record almost, gosh, I don't even know how many. This one right here, this is the new one. I had the original ATR 2100. This is the 2100X. The only thing I can see that's different is this one's black and that one was silver. But I have recorded 99% of my podcasts over my entire career with this microphone. So it's like $100. If you have a computer, you can get on Amazon right now, get $100. This thing will plug right into your computer with a USB microphone and out, or with a USB cord, and out of the gate, out of the box, it's going to sound amazing. When I meet people, friends of mine, and they're like, man, I want to get into podcasting, and I'm doing it, I'll send them one of these microphones so they start out with the right thing. You don't got to buy an $8,000 Heil and all that stuff. If you want to look fancy on camera, do it later. But you can start a podcast right now for $100, and you could use this microphone. Now, the one other piece of equipment I do have, it's called a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 mixer, and it sits over here to my left. It's really small. It's easy to kind of travel and transport around. I've got one at my office, and I've got one here at the house. And I can drop this thing in a backpack or a suitcase, take it with me if I've got a podcast on the road. There's also one called the Scarlett Solo 3rd Gen USB audio interface. And the only difference in them is mine has 2 holes in it, so I can plug 2 microphones in it if me and Jocelyn want to record. And the Scarlett Solo only has 1. Now, what this audio interface does is it gives you a lot more control over the background noise. So it's got a little knob on it. You can turn the gain up and down. And I can record in this room. I could have a fan going. My kids could be running up and down the hall, which I just heard somebody drop something and break something, but you didn't hear it because I've got this Scarlett 2i2 mixer. And it lets me kind of turn the background noise up and down, lets me turn my volume up and down. So it gives me a little bit more control over what I'm doing. Right now on Amazon, you can get the Scarlett Solo 3rd Gen audio interface. You just need 1 hole, it's just you talking in the beginning. You can get that for $125. So $200, $300, and you're podcasting right now. The one that I use, the 2i2, it's $329, but you really don't need it because you could even record with 2 microphones. All you need is like a Y splitter. The only difference is you wouldn't be able to control each microphone. So I plug my microphone into the Scarlett. I plug the Scarlett into my computer, and I hit record over on Zoom, and voila, we have a podcast. I'll drop some links to this in the show note, and I'll show you how much I love this equipment, and I don't even care about it. I'm not going to use an affiliate link. I don't care. I don't care if you give me a little penny commission on Amazon like these other people do. This is what Shane Sams actually uses. If you watch this over on our YouTube channel, you're going to see the ATR 2100X right in front of my face. Now, if you want to make your podcasting just a little more comfortable, there's one more thing that I have. It's called a boom mic. So if you're looking on YouTube, I got this thing with springs and stuff on it, and I can move this little thing around so it hangs in front of me, but it comes with a stand. So you can just put it in front of you and record it first. This just makes it a little bit comfortable later. And a boom mic like this is like $20. So there you go. That's all the equipment that you need. If you want to start podcasting today, order an ATR 2100X microphone. If you wanted to sound a little better, get you one of those Scarlett Solos or Scarlett 2i2s. That'll let you have a little bit more control of the background noise. But I'll be honest with you, the software nowadays, Zoom and things like that, like you can click a button and it says remove background noise. Out of the box, the ATR 2100 plugged into your computer is all you need. Works on a Mac or PC. The reason I don't worry about fancy equipment, y'all, is because I want to record. Let's go. Let's talk. Let's get the story. That's what sells. Let's get the pitches. That's what sells. Let's get those calls to action. That's what sells. Listen, you ain't a podcaster unless your podcast is somewhere where people can listen to it. The most important thing you can do is record it. The sound doesn't have to be perfect. My first podcasts are terrible. You go back and listen to the first 20 episodes. I didn't even know how to record with me and Jocelyn in the same room. We recorded on Skype on 2 computers. You can hear echo. It's awful. You get better. I can make a perfect podcast now anywhere. On a hotel. I've recorded in the car while it's moving. It's not important how you record what you say. It's important what you say and how you say it. Also, real quickly, you need a podcast host. I'm going to throw this in there. I don't really have a software category because we don't really use any fancy software, really. But we host our podcast on Libsyn, LIBSYN.com. It lets you upload your podcast after you record it. You can hit a button and it shares it to all the podcast networks, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It even lets you post on some social media stuff. They've got, you can run ads on it. You can insert ads in any of your podcasts. Really great tool. And that's where we host our show. All right. So step number 1 was don't worry about fancy equipment. Just use what Shane told you. Step number 2, don't worry about fancy guests. People come up to me all the time. They're like, I want to start a podcast, but I just can't talk to famous people like you, Shane. And I just can't meet the people you do. And I just don't know anybody who would be on my show and blah, 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 blah. Listen, you're not going to have fancy guests in the beginning if you got a guest podcast. That's okay. I didn't either. Yes, you may hear me interview now people, famous entrepreneurs like Amy Porterfield or Dean Graziosi. You may hear me talk to influencers like Priscilla Shire, people with over 1 million followers on social media. But y'all, my first podcast that I ever recorded was a podcast about coaching football. I couldn't get any college coaches or any NFL coaches or any famous people to talk to me. So I got an old buddy from high school who is the local 7th grade middle school defensive coordinator. I could not even get the 7th grade head coach to talk to me on my podcast. I had to go get the 7th grade defensive coordinator, the second in command. And when I recorded it, all I had was like one of those old, remember those old tape recorders that you would hit play, the reporter would hit play on it. It looked like that. It was digital, but it looked just like that. And I had to hit play on that and record on that in the middle of the table in my little apartment in this little bitty town in the middle of nowhere. And then I recorded that and I moved it over to the computer. You could barely hear us. We were too far away from the microphones. And we just talked. We talked about defense. Man, he loves defense. We talked about the 6'2" defense. I'll never forget it. It was my first podcast. I said it before. Joe Rogan, the biggest podcaster on the planet. Love him or hate him. He's got the most downloads. But he started out, he was like, I'm just going to record me and my friends talking because it's hilarious. And he sat around and talked to his friends, and they just talked. And they just recorded, they just released it out there. He didn't have a grand plan on talking, to Elon Musk and presidents and, Edward Snowden's and all these people. He just started talking and said, I wonder who else would talk to me. And he started asking to see who would talk to him. I remember when I did get my first big guest on the Coach XO show, I had gotten like 10, 20 episodes in. I'd reached out to some people on Twitter and some people said yes. And I asked myself that question. I said, wow. Now that my podcast is out, people can see it's real. There's a bunch of people that have talked on it. I wonder who else would say yes to me. So I reached out to Hal Mumme, who was a very famous coach, Hall of Fame coach, invented the passing offenses basically that we see today every Saturday and Sunday. It's called the air raid offense. Changed the game of football forever. And I went to the University of Kentucky. He coached at Kentucky, so I used that as a bridge. And I said, will you talk to me? And he said, yes. And I said, wow, Hal Mumme said yes to me. And then that weekend, after Hal Mumme got on there, I released that show. And I was watching Sports Center, or maybe it was College Game Day, and it was College Game Day, and there was a special that ESPN did on this guy down in Louisiana who he was famous because he never punted. He just went for it on fourth down every time, no matter what. I thought, oh wow, that guy was just on ESPN. I wonder if he would talk to me. And I reached out to his school, and he did. He came on my show. So he was on ESPN one weekend, and he was on the Coach XO show hosted by Shane Sams the next, just because I asked. But I had a backlog of 20, 30 podcasts. So when I sent it there, I could say, hey, check out the link. These are the other people we had. And I mentioned, and I talked to Hal Mumme last week. So that really was like, yeah, I'll talk to this guy. He's talked to famous people, blah, blah, blah. But it stacked on top of each other as I went ahead. I mean, I went in like 20, 30 episodes from 7th grade defensive middle school coach in my hometown to a dude who was literally on ESPN the week before. But it was all because I started, I recorded, I kept recording. I said yes to everybody at first. And then once I got a couple good guests, I used that as leverage to prove to people that it was worth coming on my show. And listen, you don't have to talk to anybody at first. You can just talk to yourself, like talk out loud. Look what I'm doing right now. This is a solo show. Now, I'm going to tell you in a minute how to have a really good solo show and a really good guest show. I've got a little script that you can use. But a podcast will give you instant influence. It will make you official. It's like speakers. When you go up on stage, you're a speaker. The crowd's always wondering, how did that guy get up there? I know that's what they're wondering when I'm there. How did this guy get up there? Who gave this old boy the microphone? But podcasting is the same thing. Like it's like being an author. Like you're a creator, and most people can't do this or don't do this. Like they don't even try. You're trying. You're listening. You want to do this. So when you start out, go solo or get people and just talk to them about the topics you love, and then reach out. Send 100 messages to 100 people that you would love to talk to in the world. If 5 of them come back, you'll have some great guests, and you'll have leverage that you can use to go out and find better guests in the future. Start somewhere. All right. Tip number 3 for growing a podcast as an anchor piece of content in your business or your mission or your nonprofit, whatever it is for the first year, I want you to totally ignore the data. I don't even want you to log in. Look at it once a quarter. That's the only difference in a business owner and a CEO. Quarterly reports. A business owner is obsessing over it every single day, looking at everything, getting depressed because they only got 10 downloads. A CEO says, all right, we're going to do what it takes to win every day, every week, all month. That's going to stack up month after month after month. And I'm going to check this about every quarter. So the CEO is focused on the doing. The wannabe entrepreneur, podcaster, business owner is focused on the data. You can focus on the data later. You can hire people to focus on the data, but you don't need to focus on the data in the beginning. This is counterintuitive. I know. But there's just nothing good from sitting there and staring at your statistics. I'm telling you, I barely look at it now. And I got a company that's doing millions in sales this year. Data informs decisions, but decisions still have to be made. And you ain't got a lot of data in the beginning, people. There's not going to be a ton of people listening. But if you don't launch a podcast, there'll be 0 people listening. So we got to get your podcast out there. Just be consistent in the first year. Commit to releasing your podcast at least once a week. Be consistent. Commit to being prolific. Be prolific with your podcast. You should set up social media accounts for your podcast on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram. What am I leaving out? Oh, and you need to do something on TikTok because TikTok's everywhere. And then you need to set up a YouTube account where you can upload your podcast to YouTube. And you need to be prolific. You need to share in those places every single week. So you record a podcast consistently. You release a podcast on the same day every week. Whoever does find you, make sure they know you're going to be there for them consistently. You prolifically share it every single week. And then you relentlessly work at getting the podcast to be better, to find good guests, to write good solo shows, to write great show notes for your podcast. Work on making the content the best it will be. If you'll ignore the data and you'll just let it happen, and you'll just be consistent, prolific, and relentless with your recording, with your sharing, and with your production, at the end of the first 3 months, you're going to have a much better product, and you are going to have people that are listening to your show. You just are. Little side note here too. Always have a free gift on every podcast. Like if you can go out from the beginning and you can make a little PDF guide of something you know or something you teach or something you love, or you can record a little video that maybe teaches something, anything you can give away for free, and you can pitch a URL in your podcast, that podcast audience that will come, if you release it out there, somebody's going to find that thing in search and somebody's going to listen to it. Somebody's going to see it on social media and share it. But if you have an opt-in, a lead magnet, something you can pitch, you're going to start growing an email list, which is going to eventually be something you can use to make money. All right, we got don't worry about fancy equipment. That's our first one. Just use that stuff that we said. If you need links to it, head over to the show notes. No affiliate links on this one, y'all. Just what I really recommend. Number 2, don't worry about fancy guests. Just go solo and talk to anybody that will talk to you. Half the people you think are famous, nobody knows them. Like, think about this. Somebody with 1 million followers in America still has 299 million people that ain't following them. Nobody knows who they are. Number 3, ignore the data. Just be consistent, prolific, and relentless. Record the shows, release the shows. Record the shows, release the shows. All right, step number 4, sell your something, not somebody else's something. A lot of people look at podcasting like the old school ad game, man. You got a show on TV or a radio station, you throw some ads on it. And I hear podcasters all the time go, I'm looking for ads. I got 100 downloads. Will somebody give me $25 to be a sponsor or whatever? Or I got 1,000 downloads. Will somebody give me $50? You know, it's like ridiculous. The ad game is a rabbit hole that you don't want to go down. Joe Rogan reads ads on his podcast because he has 100 million people listening to him. I think it's 11 million an episode. But I don't recommend you go down that road. I recommend you sell something of your own. This could be courses. It could be memberships. It could be something you teach online. It could be coaching. Are you a one-on-one coach? Are you a life coach? You could coach somebody in something. And use that valuable real estate on your podcast for ads to your product. You hear me pitch it right here. This podcast is sponsored by the Flipped Lifestyle community, where we start, build, and grow online businesses together. And I pitch it every week, flippedlifestyle.com/free. I'm pitching my thing. Over on Flipped Lifestyle, we pitch the same thing. The reason why is my thing is more lucrative. If I sell 1,000 people something for $50 a month, I'm making $50,000 a month for my podcast. Ain't nobody going to give me $50,000 to run an ad on any of my shows. I've got a great audience. I've got a pretty big audience, but it's not 1 million people a month. If I go out there and try to sell ads, nobody's going to give me any money for it. But I can sell 100 of my thing for $100, and that's $10,000. So I highly recommend you pitch something that is your own, that you create, a course, a coaching, a training. Maybe you've got supplements and e-commerce that you sell. Sell your stuff on your podcast. See, money makes the mission possible. Money supports the mission. Your podcast is your mission. My mission is to equip entrepreneurs, to equip authors, to equip experts, to equip real people. My mission is to help people earn income on the internet. That's why I'm on this earth. That's why I do all these shows, because I know income equals freedom. I know income turns into influence, and I know influence can help you make an impact on this world for your own personal cause, or if you're a Christian, for the kingdom of God, for your family, for your family's future, for your inheritance to your children's children. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, the podcasters that I know that make the most money are selling their stuff and not somebody else's. All right, finally, this is a big one. Podcasting is not rattling on. Now, it doesn't take a lot of prep. I wrote the outline to this podcast on a piece of paper. That's actually my rule. I have to be able to write the outline for every podcast on the front sheet of one piece of paper. If it goes over one sheet of paper, it's too long. If it's only half the page, it's too short. Nah, man, this is baby bear's porridge. Y'all know what I mean? This is baby bear's porridge right here. This is a podcast plan on one sheet, top to bottom, not front and back, just front. Okay. So that's how I outline my podcast. So you got to do a little planning. You can't just willy-nilly turn the microphone on. You will be able to eventually sometimes when you get good at it, but you're not going to be able to do that in the beginning. You got to have a little plan. But podcasting is not rambling. It's not banter. I hate banter. Like, banter's fun when two people are interesting and they're talking and having a good time. You're learning about somebody because there's a reason for the banter. But sometimes people are just like, oh, I went to the PTO meeting last week and then I got a flat tire on the way home and my new Gucci bag got a little rip in it and I was very upset. And what are you talking about? It's a podcast. Give me a topic. Like, this one's about how to start a podcast. Why would I talk about my water bottle or something? Right? Doesn't make any sense. It's got to make sense in context. When you start a podcast, the last thing I remember you is craft stories. Craft stories. Pepper everything you do with stories. Look at all the stories I've told you today. I told you how I started a podcast, and me and Jocelyn didn't know how to record. And so it messed up and it sounded terrible. I told you how the story of how I recorded my first podcast with terrible equipment. I told you how the story of how my first podcast guest was a 7th grade coach, and it led to this guy on ESPN, right? Not only is the overall podcast telling a story, I'm telling you the story of how to start a podcast, but I've got other little stories peppered in. These stories can come from your background, they can come from things you create, or they can come from the conversations that you have with your guests. This is actually the most important part, guys. People think that the audio equipment's the most important part. No, the equipment's good enough. If it sounds pretty good and there's not popping and it's not sounding bad, you're fine. You don't have to have the best audio on the planet. You have to have good audio, not great audio. Fancy guests, no, that's not important. No, the conversation with the guest is important. The story the guest tell, that's important. The data, it's not important. I'm telling you, the effort is way more important than that. And the story will improve the data. And even what you sell, if you craft great stories, you're going to build an audience that's going to be so big that you're going to be able to sell to it. And even at a low percentage, you're going to be able to do just fine. People are here. People are listening for the story. So you got to craft good stories. So I'm going to give you 2 frameworks here real quick to craft great stories. And I use similar frameworks to this either on a solo show when I'm telling a story, when I'm teaching something, or when I'm interviewing someone. I actually take people through this. So I want to talk real quick about teaching something. If you're doing a teaching podcast, here's how I recommend doing it. Very simple framework. All right. You always start off with a little mini story. And I'm going to talk about how to build that story here in just a second. But you always start with a story, not banter. This is a thoughtful story that leads to the thing you are teaching to set the stage and set the context for the listener. So when you start teaching, you got their full undivided attention. When I'm on stage, the first thing I do before I teach anything is I tell people how I became an entrepreneur. I used to be a school teacher in Southeast Kentucky. I found out that something horrible was happening to my son at his daycare center. One morning, he told me that one of the people there was locking him in a bathroom for hours at a time. I asked for the day off work. My boss told me no. And in that moment, I promised I would never work for someone else again. I wanted to have total control of my income, total influence on my life, so that when my son needed me, I could be there for him. So I went out and I learned how to become an online entrepreneur. I became a podcaster. I started making money on the internet. We launched memberships and I got 100 people to pay me $50 a month to make $60,000 a year. And on September 27th, 2013, I walked in and in that same office, my boss told me no. I told them bye. That's my whole story I tell on stage. It's longer than that, right? And I've done that 1,000 times. You'll get to do it that easy too. But that story sets the stage for, this guy's not just here because of his ego. This guy's not just here because of this thing. He's here to teach me something that changed his life. And if I'll pay attention, maybe it could change mine too. So when I get to the teaching part, they're going to write down the notes and pay attention. So you have to start every podcast with a story, even if you're teaching something technical. On a podcast, I try to give no more than 3 steps. If there's more steps, they're going to have to go somewhere after the podcast to get those steps. So the first 3 steps in starting, building, and growing an online business, if I was doing a teaching thing, but maybe I did a podcast, how to start an online business. I would say, here's a story that sets the stage. And here's your first 3 steps. You got to find an idea. You got to figure out who that idea is solving a problem for. And then you got to turn that into a product. And then I'm done. And then at the end of the podcast, I'll give a call to action because you only have 45 minutes to an hour, y'all. You can't do a 6-hour training on a podcast. And then I'll give a call to action that will say the next step. The next step might be go buy my thing, right? The next step could be tune in next week and I'll tell you more. But that's the general teaching framework that we use on podcasts. A super engaging story, 3 points, and a call to action. Okay, now that's teaching. You're literally teaching something, right? Now, you can go more than 3 points if you got time. Today, I did more than 3 points because there was more than 3 things I wanted to say. At the end of this, once I'm done, I could say, if you need more help, go to, and you can get more help. But I wanted to talk about the equipment. I wanted to talk about guests. I wanted to talk about the data, and I wanted to talk about selling something. And I really wanted to talk about story because I'm obsessed with stories. So that's a teaching format. A story format is a little different. What you've got to do, if you're on a solo show and you're telling a story about your life, you got to make you the hero and you got to take people on the hero's journey. Now, there's a lot of hero's journey frameworks out there. I'm going to give you the exact script that I use. This is a blend of stuff I've learned from Joseph Campbell, Hero with 1,000 Faces, Donald Miller, Story Brand, researching Pixar and how they tell their stories. And I read stuff about stories all the time because, if you go to shanesams.com, you're going to see it says I'm a podcaster and a storyteller. Like, I love to tell stories. I love to hear people's stories. That's why I love the medium of podcasting so much. And this is the framework I use whether I'm telling a story or I interview. This is the exact framework I used last week when I interviewed Priscilla Shires. The same story I use when I interview anybody. It can be shortened and lengthened. If you got an hour and a half, or if you got 30 minutes, you can use a framework like this. And these are just some things that I like to do. All right. When you're interviewing a guest or you're telling a story, you always want to start with once upon a time, right? I mean, that's what it is, man. Like, once upon a time, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? Like, long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. Like, great stories start with once upon a time. Who were you? What were you doing before the story started? You know, I was a school teacher in Southeast Kentucky once upon a time, right? You got to start with once upon a time because you got to set the stage for the catalyst. You got to set the stage for the catalyst. You got to say what caused you to move. What causes Frodo to leave the Shire? What caused Priscilla Shire to go into writing? What caused Dean Graziosi to start buying ads and start buying infomercials? Like, what was happening before that even made you think to do this? If you'll start your podcast, don't say once upon a time, but you can say things like, hey, take me back to before you were successful. Let me go back to before I was an entrepreneur, right? Let me go back to when I was an 0-10 football coach before I became an 8-2 football coach. You can take people back and set the stage. You really want to do a prologue or a once upon a time or something so that people know this person isn't a superhero, right? If you just start with people's story where they're at now, you frame your guest as a superhero. And your listeners will say, I can't do that. This person's special, right? But if you go back far enough and you go back long enough, you'll realize we ain't nothing, nobody's special. We just have special circumstances that propelled us forward, okay? So we always start with once upon a time, we set the setting, okay? Then Jocelyn and I have what we call the catalyst. Something happened in your life that made you make a change, okay? This can be good or bad. It's not always a bad thing. A good buddy of mine, Mark Mason of the Moonlighting on the Internet podcast, awesome guy. We were eating lunch together one day, and he said something really super interesting, man. I love it. He said, Shane, everybody is running from something or towards something. I was like, oh, that's deep. That's good. That's the catalyst, right? You want to dig into what made you be a writer? What turned you into an entrepreneur? What made you want to be an Olympic sprinter? What made you want to be a 7th grade defensive football coach, right? Like, what was the catalyst that made you get involved? Okay. What are you running toward or what are you running from? You know, my catalyst for me was my son in that daycare center, you know, like that boss telling me, no, you gotta handle your personal problems after work. That was my catalyst. I was running from that job. A friend of mine, she started a business and she wanted to homeschool her kids. That was her catalyst. That was her running toward, right? It was a dream. So you got to pull people's catalyst out of them. Okay. Now, from that point on, this is a cool thing I learned in the way Pixar makes movies. You want to pull out at least 3 more parts of their story, and you just want to keep building on the catalyst. So, oh, the catalyst happened. That thing happened to you. So because of that, what happened next? Right? That's all you got to say to people. Like, ooh, that happened. What happened next? So they'll tell you, you know, because my boss told me no, what happened next? I started researching businesses and I failed miserably at offline businesses. And then you stop and you say, ooh, because of that, what happened next? You say, well, I got online and I started looking for online businesses. Ooh, because of that, what happened next? Well, I finally launched an online business that was successful and we made enough money to quit our jobs. Bam. We have used the because of that, what happened next framework to get to, right, the place where we need to be, the moral of the story, the conclusion of the story of this particular story. It's just like reading through the Bible. A lot of people will read through the Bible. They'll bounce around topical. There's nothing wrong with that. And then a lot of pastors will teach through the Bible like in sequential order, like I think it's called exponential. I don't know. I'm saying this word terribly wrong. Pastors out there, please don't correct me on this one. They read it in order, okay? Because it builds on it. It's like, oh, well, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. Ooh, because of that, what happened next? Ooh, God was already in creation. So he said, I'm going to create the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, right? Like you're reading through a story in the order that it happened. Keep people on their railroad track. And what you will do, what your goal here is in storytelling in this framework is to reveal fears and obstacles that this person faced and overcame, right? The fears and the obstacles are the meat of the story. Like who were the people and the things that tried to hold them back, right? Because of that, what happened next? And you can even pause if someone's just saying, well, I just went straight to success. They no. Because you did this, what was the next challenge you faced? Because of this, what happened next? You can take people through their story in a better way than they can even write it down. You can do this with your own story. Like I was going to tell any story, right? If I was going to tell the story of how I went from an 0-10 football coach to a football coach who could actually win more games on Friday night every year than they lost, I would start with the catalyst. The catalyst was, or I would start in the past. I would say, I was at home and I was working in insurance and I just wanted to do something more with my life. I was, working for my dad. I was selling insurance and, I just wanted to do something bigger. And I really, when I was a kid, late in my high school career, I got hurt and I didn't get to finish my senior season. And I always missed football. And I thought, wow, being a football coach, I would get football back. Bam. That plants the seed for the catalyst, which was I'd had enough, right? Bam. I went out and I tried to be a football coach. And then I tell the story. Because of that, I went to a school and got a job. Because of that, I met a coach and got a college job. Because of that, I got another college job. Because of that, I finally got a head coaching job. So I can tell this story in sequential order, starting from the once upon a time, going through the catalyst, and then saying, because of that, what happened next? Eventually, you got to wrap up the story. You got to know where you're going, right? So, when I was talking to Priscilla Shire, I really wanted to unpack the story of her being a writer. Like, why writing? Like, of all things, why writing? You're a great speaker. You've got all these other talents, awesome actress. Why writing? Why do you write so many books? So that was the story I wanted to get to. So when I got to the place of basically why she became a writer, how she went through the writing process, and now how does her writing career look today, I've concluded that part of the story. I don't need to tell every part of Priscilla Shire's story forever, right? I just have to get to a place where I've got a conclusion. And then when you get to a conclusion of that story, you can kind of sum it up, right? We call it the epilogue, okay? So if the once upon a time is like the prologue of the story, the epilogue is at the end. And Pixar words this in a really interesting way. They say, and ever since then, life has been ... So you go out and you ask people like, man, since your writing career took off, how's life been? Oh, it's crazy. It's this, it's that, and the other. And that sums it up. It gives it a conclusion where you can at least end this chapter of the journey. Okay. And all podcasts should end with a call to action. So every story leads to a call to action, and you spend that call to action back to whatever you're selling. So that's pretty much how we do it. Like this prologue format with a catalyst. Because of that, what happened next? And I'll keep going down that rabbit hole. You can explore tangents in between there, but I'm trying to unpack fears and obstacles. And then I'm trying to unpack the solutions to those fears and obstacles. I'm setting the tone. I'm picking the story we're going to tell because it's my podcast. I'm taking people down this rabbit hole. That's my job, is to guide people through the story. We wrap it up with like an epilogue, and we give a call to action on how that can help other people, because the ultimate goal of our podcast is to gain influence, is to gain income, is to make an impact out in the world, right? We don't want to go into podcasting as just an arrogant, I want people to hear what I have to say. That's part of it. I mean, you want people to hear what you have to say. Everybody's got something to say. But it's also helping people get results. And if you follow these 5 steps, if you don't worry about fancy equipment, you just get what I tell you. If you don't worry about fancy guests, you ain't got to have fancy guests in the beginning. Just talk to yourself or talk to somebody else. Doesn't matter who comes on your show. If you ignore the data and you just focus on being consistent, prolific, and relentless for the first quarter, first year, when you monetize, don't go chasing ad dollars. Make mad dollars by selling your own thing, people. The influence will come. The income will come. And if your podcast teaches and entertains and informs and inspires through amazing storytelling, you will have everything you need to make a big impact with your podcast, just like we do right here at the Shane Sams Show. All right, y'all, that's all the time I have for this podcast. I hope it helps you go out and get your message to the world. I don't want to be the only podcaster listening to my voice. I want you to, too. I want you to pick up your stone, cast it out there, and make an impact as well. If you need any help, you know where we can go to get it. The Shane Sams Show is brought to you by flippedlifestyle.com. That is my business, my brand, where I help people start, build, and grow online businesses of their own. I help people use their podcast to grow memberships, where you can get 100 people to pay you $50 a month, make $60,000 a year, 200 to make $120,000. Scale it as big as you want. An online business that can give you influence, can help you make income, and help you make an impact out in the world. We have an awesome product there where we can help you find your idea for an online business. You can get access to that over at flippedlifestyle.com/free. That's FLIPPED lifestyle.com/free. And if you love this podcast, we would love for you to share it. Listen, do us a favor. Go leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Tell us what you love about the show. Tell us who your favorite guest is, whatever you want to talk about. I will go down that. I'll read all those reviews. And then, hey, hit that share button in your app of choice. Maybe it's Spotify, maybe it's Apple, maybe it's something else. Share it on social media. Share it on Facebook. Share it on Twitter. Share it on LinkedIn. Share it somewhere you know people are paying attention to you. If you help us grow the show, we can keep bringing more amazing content to you every single week. Y'all, that's all the time I have for this podcast. I hope that it helped you become a podcaster too. I'll be back next week with some more amazing guests and incredible stories. Make sure you tune in to listen. Until then, in whatever it is you're doing, podcast, business, marriage, parenting, life, be consistent, be prolific, be relentless, make an impact. Pick your stone up off the ground, cast it out upon the waters, and you cause many ripples too. I'll see you then.